I think participants are jumping up, so I'm just going to give you maybe a minute, and then we can start. Are we good to go? While we are, I think quite a few people have already joined, so we can start with intro, and then I pass on to Didar. Are we good to go? Yeah. Aris, Laura, all good? Okay. All right. Okay. So welcome everyone. Welcome to EMMSAD 2021. You can see the nice Sydney Opera House and Harbour. Unfortunately, we are not here in Sydney. Oh, I mean, as a whole conference, but conference is up in the air somewhere in the cloud. But we have Professor Didar here to kicking off the conference with the keynote, the role of a user's involvement in contemporary software-supported business process improvement. So a very topical topic. Professor Didar, as a professor of software engineering and also a deputy dean of graduate research school at the University of Technology, Sydney. I have known Didar probably maybe 15, 16 years when I'm a PhD student. It's a long time ago. So I have followed her work along the way as well. And I'm going to pass on to Didar now for the rest of the introduction. We will get to hear Didar about 60 minutes for 1 hour. And then we have 15 minutes towards the end to wrap up with the questions. And while the questions are coming, if Didar wants to take a specific question during the talk as well, by all means, she can invite people. So welcome everyone, and welcome Didar to EMMSAD 2021. Over to you to go, and you may start. Thank you.
Thank you, Asif. Hello, everyone. It's really a pleasure and honor to be asked to give a keynote for this joint sitting of EMMSAD and BPMDS. And I have to first make a confession. It's the first time that I'm giving a keynote on Zoom. So I hope that everything will go smoothly. And also, of course, we've all had experiences about COVID. And as of yesterday, we've now got into our second full lockdown in Sydney, and everything is going kind of crazy again. So I wish there was a chance to come to Melbourne and be in face-to-face, but look, it's not going to happen. So let's make the best of it for today. And I would prefer to take the questions right at the end, if you don't mind. So, because I think it's really difficult. If we were in the same room, I would have been happy to take the students' questions as we go, but I think I'd leave it till the end. So just by way of quick introduction, I guess, as Asif said, I've known Asif for a long time, and he, by commenting that he's knew me from PhD time makes me feel really old now. My main work is in requirements engineering and more broadly in software engineering. And I know that we have the audience in these two conferences come from different backgrounds, you know, some from IS, some from software engineering, some general computer science. So hopefully what I would like to say would be of interest and use to most of you. So I want to ask first with a very broad question on how should software make users feel? And I think that this is a question that really we don't ask quite often, not often enough. And the fact that the feelings and the affects of users really does matter. And I want to start by saying that really asking the question about can software make us feel happy? I think that we can all agree that we derive a modest amount of joy from software that we use most of the time. And very often, though software makes us feel bored, isolated, or even angry, how do some technologies manage to give us feelings of joy and pride and connection while others do not? And I guess this is not just an academic question, so to speak. Most of us are spending more time than ever using technology, particularly at work. Recently, in a report from McKinsey, Michael Chui and his colleagues pointed out that in modern work environments, managers and professionals spend an average 28 hours each week interacting with the media and technology. Instead of feeling dull and unpleasant or downright frustrating, what if these interactions could actually foster positive emotions? So our dozens of hours of weekly screen time would be transformed into opportunities to elevate our mood and sense of well-being. And so this is really important. So what I wanted to say is that the quality of interaction with software can really change the feelings and moods that we have. And so workplace programs really should aim to increase our physical and emotional well-beings. And but we also want to make sure that everyday tasks such as checking emails, spreadsheets, searching for information, etc., are meaningful and joyful. So I really want to sort of start with this note because I think it's a really important thing to think about. And I want to just say a few words about how we think of software as a media for bringing order. And so we know that software systems frequently don't work as expected, and sometimes they don't work at all. And I'm sure all of us in this webinar have had this kind of experience. Little is known about the nature and extent of the experience of the disruption and frustration and anger, disappointment and difficulties that we make. And we know that also software that is developed according to what we know as the best practices can still produce unexpected results and disruptions, leading to many dissatisfied users. So in terms of business processes, we want to improve business processes. And software-supported business process improvement is not just about technology and business, but it's also about humans whose job and life is going to be transformed during the process improvement. And the most important part of this transformation is basically about those changes that are made in the processes that humans follow and the kind of behavior that the humans demonstrate as a result of this transformation. And again, I'm just making some of these comments because I know we all know about this, but just to emphasize that the most critical asset in business process improvement are users and humans, because they are the makers and breakers of any change. Now, how well have humans usually get informed and involved and travel during this journey of transformation? And I think this is the question that I want to focus on, about involving and being informed about the journey. So I want to now tell you about something that's recently, during COVID lockdown, I was reading Dan Brown's bestseller, Origin, for the second time. And I came across this text that captured my attention. hang on a minute, I think I've got something on my screen that is, okay. So basically, he talks about computers being being the devices that make order in our life. So he talks about the predisposition to organization is written into our DNA. And so it should come as no surprise to us that the greatest invention the human mind has created, well, according to him anyway, is the computer, and which is a machine specifically to help create order out of chaos. And he talks about the Spanish word for computer, ordenador, which is literally means that which creates order. So, and he says that if he could look into human mind and read the operating system of mind, we would find something like despise chaos and create order. So this is the root program in our brain, and this is exactly how humans are inclined against chaos and in favor of order. Now, why did this kind of rang the bell in my head? Because I was thinking about this about a decade ago, about the usual disruptions and chaos that new software systems create in people's daily work and life, at least during the early days of its release and use by humans, until we either get used to them or we may devise workarounds, or ultimately just we put up with it because we have no other choice. And I was approached 10 years ago, and this came about because at my university, we were told to use a new system, and this system was absolutely clunky and awful to use. And this is how I was feeling 10 years ago. And I was approached by two colleagues, an anthropologist, specifically a digital anthropologist, John Marshall, and a political scientist, James Goodman. They wanted to join with me to apply for a multidisciplinary research grant to the Australian Research Council to study the order-disorder complex that is driven by digital transformation in society. So the question for us really is, how is order created from chaos, particularly in this case of software development? And I wanted to, sorry, just I got some pop-up on the screen. I wanted to just mention that one of the outputs from this 5-year project was a book called Disorder and Disinformation Society. And this was a major output from this research, multidisciplinary research that I mentioned. And basically, this book is the first general social analysis that considers the daily experiences of information disruption and software failures within contemporary society. So most social theories see disorder as secondary, pathological, or uninteresting. And this book takes a disordering process as central to social life. And we engage with theories of information society that's privilege information order and offers a strong counterpoint that is centered on this information. So I don't really want to tell you what is in this book, but this is how my journey about thinking on involving users began, because I thought that this whole socio-technical side of software development that helps us understand the dynamics of software failures as they impinge on information workers and our daily life explores why computerized systems have become inherently self-disruptive. So how should software create order? That's the main question. And for this, to create order, we need to identify and understand the nature of the current disorders that exist in users' environments, because you want to remove the disorders to create order. And the people that we are trying to help often they don't want technology, system, and software per se. Rather, they are increasingly looking new or better ways of working to achieve their goals, or new, better ways of interacting and communicating, or new, better ways of living. So we need to sort of shift our focus a little bit from technology, system, software to some of these aspects. The core focus of my research in the last 2 decades, as I said at the beginning, has been in requirements engineering, which is the communication-rich, multidisciplinary, and human-centered part of software system development. In requirements engineering, you need to understand the world of users. And so it's natural for me to take a human-centered approach to framing research questions and carrying out research to find answers to these questions. A common misconception about requirements engineering in general is that it's all about eliciting, analyzing, specifying needs and desires and goals of the stakeholders. But I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the work of Michael Jackson and his famous problem frames, where he spoke about requirements engineering being first and foremost about problem framing. This includes identifying and formulating what is the disorder in the world of users. And these days we refer to that disorder pain points in contemporary software language. So these pain points are those what I refer to as disorders. So the typical concept of user as a person who would actually be using the system and facing the changes in the work environment that is brought about by a new system is a term that has been, the word user has been considered from many different viewpoints in the literature. And in practice, a key to this problem exploration of the user's problems and user's pain points or disorder in the environment is about looking at the boundaries and the scope of the problem. So here I talk broadly, take the broad meaning of the word user, because we all know that the word user is probably the most used and the most abused and misused word in human-centered design in general, and in requirements engineering in particular. So by user, I mean relevant stakeholders. And a stakeholder is a human who has a stake in the process of developing software and will be directly or indirectly impacted and impact the transformation that software brings about. So looking at these boundaries and scope is really important, because if we have the too wide of a scope and boundary, then we end up having too much to do. And if we narrow it down to too small, then we have lost opportunities. So to be able to do all this, we need to effectively communicate with the involved user, with the users, and involve them in the whole process. So what I'm going to talk about is, so this whole thing that I just mentioned was mainly an introduction or a preamble to what this talk is all about. It's about users' involvement. And by involvement, I often use the definition given by Barkey and Hartwig 2 decades ago as a set of behaviors or activities that's performed by users in the system development process. Now, a natural approach to mitigate risks of the dissatisfaction of users, obviously, is to get them involved. And it has been suggested that this belief is neither grounded in theory nor substantiated by sufficient empirical analysis of research data. So the benefits of involving users in software development projects have been studied very extensively over 4 decades and has been reported to contribute to satisfaction of users, and as a result of this satisfaction, leading to successful systems. However, when we look at the way in which researchers have evaluated the user involvement and system success, which is, this relationship, empirically, the results have not always been positive. So as a result, we see that many people talk about this relationship being a double-edged sword, that if it's not managed carefully, it may cause more problems. To some extent, my research objectives beginning this journey about 10 years ago was to explore involving of the users and the related problems and challenges that is faced in software development as a result of this activity. And to be able to find some insights, new insights about this complex and multifaceted phenomena. And the relationship between user involvement and system success was something that I was very interested in exploring. And obviously, as a requirements engineering researcher, I was interested to know if there is more that we can do as requirements engineering researchers and practitioners to address some of these challenges that minimize the effect that triggers disorder as a result of introducing software. So I started this journey by a systematic literature review that was basically looked at the involving users in software development and investigating the relationship that I mentioned about. What we found was that through this systematic review, we selected 87 empirical studies for over 3 decades, from 1980 to 2012. We realized that the claim that users' involvement in software development has positive impact on its success. However, previously published reviews on this topic have produced conflicting results. And this also, I should mention that this sort of began the PhD thesis of my former PhD student, Monira Banu, who is now a senior lecturer in Deakin University in Melbourne. So we looked at this systematic review in order to find some answers to why this is so. And I'm not obviously going to have time to share with you all the results. The full results are published in ISC journal. And in here, I just show you about the positive, negative, and uncertain relationship of the indication of user involvement having impact. So the positive basically means that user involvement positively contributes to success of systems, and negative the opposite, and uncertain are those who are not sure. So what exactly do we mean by system success is also highly contextual and depends on many factors. We know that system success can't be assessed and measured purely in economical terms by considering return on investment. This is partly due to the fact that it is hard to compare return on investment of a system with alternative investment opportunity. And it's also hard because intangible costs and benefits of systems are hard to identify and difficult to articulate. So the main reason why we use user satisfaction now being most widely used as an alternative measure to system success in majority of the empirical studies. So that you know, I'm not talking about return on investment here, but rather satisfaction. Okay, so another set of results that I wanted to share with you was that in our analysis, we found that there are multiple views of benefits, problems, and challenges of the user involvement and system success relationship. So we decided to build a classification of these views and attitudes to use in our analysis of the research questions, and refer to these as perspectives. And these perspectives provided the typology to classify these benefits, problems, and challenges of involvement. And we named these perspectives with the help of thematic coding, obviously. So there were psychological, managerial, political, methodological, and cultural. And the psychological state comes from the user's perception that they have control over the system development process. And the managerial looks at the participation to be properly managed to achieve the desired result of bringing about system success. And the political part looks at the degree of involvement affecting the organizational or political influence, especially when it comes to power of decision making. And the methodological one looks at the selection of particular methods of user involvement, depending on the intensity of the involvement that is required, and the other factors that play a role in the selection are varying degrees of the complexity of the project. And finally, cultural, we found that our overall purpose of user involvement can be different when linked to different cultural settings, be it national culture, organizational culture, or project culture. So organizational culture influenced the consideration and why and how to involve users. And so just a quick summary of the findings of this systematic review to wrap this up was that most of the included studies in the systematic review investigated it from the viewpoint of the development team alone. The perception and attitude of users about this involvement obviously is equally as important and informative. And so therefore we decided later to investigate user involvement from both developer and user perspective. The second thing was that the link between user involvement and system success is neither direct nor simple. And there are many factors that complicate and influence the successful outcome. And 68% of the studies show positive results, whereas 32% were either negative or uncertain. And so the effectiveness of user involvement was measured by the extent to which the desired benefits and goals were achieved. And finally, the most prominent problem that was caused by user involvement were related to communication and misunderstanding between users and development team, and which basically led to all sorts of conflicts. And there were the top challenges that hindered user involvement was also lack of motivation, followed by problems related to attitudes and behavior. So finishing off this systematic review, we became very interested in looking at this relationship of how involving users, participation of users leads to system success. And this diagram basically a summary of all the additional factors that we found in our systematic review that are at the bottom of this slide. This is basically our attempt to encapsulate and bring together all the factors that were found that contribute to this relationship. And this figure includes these two distinct but related parts. The top part is the illustration of the relationship that is not direct. So in order to achieve system success, you have to have some ways of measuring the benefits of the involvement. And these benefits in turn lead to system success, so it's indirect. And the bottom part of the diagram, the top part also show those 5 perspectives that I mentioned. And these factors have all been discussed in the paper that you can have a look. And the two top that we looked in the benefits from the psychological perspective had to do with the fact that user satisfaction is the most widely used alternative to measuring system success in majority of the empirical studies. And we found in this SLR that there were no longitudinal study that have collected data over a considerable period of time to study how user satisfaction with their involvement or their delivered system may change over different stages of development. And this presented an acceptable justification for us to conduct a longitudinal study. So the next part of my talk is going to give you a very quick summary of the longitudinal case study and its objectives. As I said, we wanted to study this relationship with a major focus on the role that user satisfaction plays. And we had 2 main research questions. What is this relationship between the satisfaction of users with their involvement in the software development and their satisfaction with the resulting system? And how does user satisfaction with their involvement and the resulting system can evolve during the course of the development that leads to system success? So a much deeper analysis we felt was needed to understand this complex interplay between these. So we started with the first case study. So the systematic review provided us an analytical framework to use to basically look at this phenomena in our case study. And there are actually two case studies that I'm going to briefly talk about today. The first one was an example of a successful project, and the second one is the example of the failed project. So we are discussing the user involvement system success relationship in both of these projects. The other thing was that we analyzed the data that we collected from this case study using the specific lens of the user satisfaction in this relationship. Case study one context was a software development project in a financial institution in Australian state government. And I collected the data in 2012, 2013. And they had a strategy for their IT to replace the bespoke Lotus Notes software with client relationship management from Microsoft. And they also wanted to create a portal for their external clients to use. They were mainly a waterfall lifecycle in software with a little bit of prototyping. And they had two sequential projects, one for the actual CRM and the other one for the client portal. And this was happening at a significant period of significant organizational change. This diagram just shows the participants in the case study. Major participants were a small team of internal developers, and there was an external consultant that the organization brought in, who was an expert in Microsoft CRM. And there was a subject matter expert from the team who was seconded 2 days a week to participate in the peer project. And the organization engaged this external consultant to do the requirements and also the whole changes that needed to take place. Okay, so the data collection, basically 28 interviews with 12 participants. Many of them were interviewed more than once. And this was basically the data was transcriptions of the interviews, but we also had observational notes attending the design workshops and requirements workshops, review of formal project documentation, and many other different bits and pieces of data. Also quite a lot of face-to-face meetings and phone conversations and follow-up questions, etc. And although the requirements gathering phase had already started, but we started our initial coding and then commenced the case study with the design and review workshop. So you will see in this diagram the two projects, CRM projects and client portal, and how they were going, and the timeline of the 4 instances of the data collection. So I collected data in 4 instances, all the way to post installation, and how the users felt about the software way out after they have gone through all the problems. So we used the results from the SLR as a basis for our analysis, namely problems caused by user involvement and challenges of user involvement. And we generated quite a lot of nodes, and these were grouped into 4 high-level categories based on the aspects of user involvement that they had covered. These were user-related, communication, and managerial consideration, and project-related. Now, in this diagram, basically, we see that the results on two sides. On the left-hand side, you see the facets that contributed to the satisfaction of the users from their involvement in the process, in the software development process. And the ones on the right-hand side are the facets or the factors that were considered as contributing to the satisfaction with the final system, with the product. And what we found was that the level of the user satisfaction evolved throughout software development. Because we were collecting data at different stages, talking to the same people, asking similar questions, and the users reported a significant number of problems and challenges in the early stages of requirements and scoping of the system. And these problems were dealt with later during the development through effective user representation and also practicing dynamic management techniques. So mainly these are the factors that we have observed, as you can see. But the interesting part was that we found that these two, satisfaction with the process and the satisfaction with the product, are mutually constituted and they influence one another. And due to the longitudinal nature of the case study, we were able to infer the evolving nature of dissatisfaction over the various stages of the software development. So a quick summary of the conclusion was, as I said, that the mutually constituted relationship between satisfaction with the involvement process and the satisfaction with the delivered system. And we refer to this as the UISS theory. Our results suggest that there are two important factors that play a crucial role in increasing the benefits. One is this dynamic management strategy that we observed. And the second was that, and this actually was introduced in the portal project, in the second project. And the second one is the effectiveness of the representation of users. So subject matter expert who was involved in in both of these projects was a very, very articulate and effective person in the role that she was playing. And it had a profound impact over the confidence that it gave to the user community who used her as someone who spoke for them, and also the development community who consider her as a very good representative, very effective representative. Now, we replicated this research from case study 1 in another case study that we conducted in a different organization for further reflection and comparative analysis. So you see, again, going back to this diagram, now I wanted to talk about the second case study, which is mainly a case study of a failed project. This was also an Australian state government organization, in-house development, a large IT department, and one person with multiple roles, and some of the interview participants there have been there for more than 10 years. So I'm just sort of looking at the context of the case study, and here is the participants. Here we had basically, sorry, click. The development team on the left-hand side in blue, and the business units, or the people from the business, on the right-hand side. And we also had an external client sitting outside who you needed to use the system, and the subject matter experts was the liaison again between these two. So we had 25 documents that was made available to us to have a look, to understand the structure of the organization and select participants for our interview. And we had 30 interviews with 20 participants, 22 questions in 2 stages of data collection. And these basically included, was very broad, looking at senior executives, regional manager, local team leaders, subject matter experts, users, and trainers. And we also did a lot of observation in meetings and requirements review gatherings and testing sessions. And we used all of this in our analysis to reflect, to confirm our findings. So going back to this diagram that I showed you before, and I don't know how it moved to the bottom of the page. This is the side of this diagram that we were examining here, because it was about satisfaction with your involvement during the process. And we found that the user dissatisfaction with their involvement and participation had a profound impact over how they ended up considering this system as a failure. And all of these that you see on the left-hand side highlighted again were observed in this case study as well. what we found, in addition to that, there was a tussle of power between users and developers that influenced the process and the product. So power played a very important role here. And ineffective user representation and management, again, was a problem. But contrary to the first case study, we found that the SME was not an effective person here and wasn't really doing his job. And of course, we found that the communication channels were misused to influence the decisions. So we find that user dissatisfaction with their involvement, which was the process, was basically due to inter-organizational politics and ineffective role of the project manager as well as the subject matter expert. And these two together ended up impacting the user-developer communication. And so, as I said, our observation in this case study was that politics was manifested through power to influence both the product and the process and decision making. Finally, just to quick wrap up with the findings from this case study was that we observed that the project manager and the chief operating officer had a hands-off approach by those who had, because they had the legitimate power. These are the formal authority to make decisions, but they had a hands-off approach altogether. Then we saw that indirect influence is exerted by either expert powers or referent powers. And these were basically people who they possessed higher level of skills and knowledge, or they had a higher level of interpersonal skills for communication and negotiation. So we did an analysis of all this data based on power and politics in software development. So in order to influence the decisions, the key power players were observed to exploit the communication channels. And as a result, there were many, many miscommunications observed that caused a lot of frustration and dissatisfaction among the users. So these communication issues, and this paper was published in EASE Conference, Evaluation and Assessment of Software Engineering, Power and Politics of User Involvement. And there were 5 recurring issues: ineffective communication, lack of communication, vague or unidentified software project-related communication roles, and lack of communication of the big picture to the users. Finally, no consultation. So all of these are the communication issues that we observed. So for further analysis, we checked these 2 case studies against each other in addition to using the frame from the systematic review and putting these together. Now, finally, we came up on the basis of our longitudinal study, devised 5 critical questions that management should consider before involving users in product development. And these are those 5 research questions. First of all, why to involve? So management have to have a clear vision of the goals and objectives they need to achieve through involving users. And this has to be clearly communicated in the vision of the big picture to the users to motivate their involvement. The second question is when to involve. So we find that they should be involved throughout the software development lifecycle. However, their involvement during analyzing requirements is the most critical to deal with the inevitable issues and challenges coming later on. And the third question is who to involve. Obviously, relevant people with the right expertise, with right motivation, with right communication skills for user representation. And these are very important. Fourth one was how to involve. Now, there are many techniques that have been offered in the literature and are available to guide user involvement depending on the role and the level and degree of their involvement. And finally, how much to involve. So this is about the extent and degree and level of influence you want to give to your users should have to, and what kind of influence and power should they have on the final product so that you can avoid conflicts and misunderstanding later. And these guidelines were published in IEEE software in a paper titled The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So now I wanted just to move on from here to talk about Agile, because we also did another case study in the Agile software development, but I'm not going to have time to talk a lot about this. We know that Agile approaches emphasize daily interactions between user representatives and the development team, and the frequent interaction between them is aimed to strengthen the collaboration. Frequent user involvement does not imply effective involvement, because one of the factors that may influence the effectiveness of user involvement is how their expectations are aligned of different stakeholders regarding this involvement. So this study is about looking at the expectations of different, the two sides, the development and the this was actually, so just to acknowledge, it was a collaboration with 3 colleagues in Auckland University of Technology that I have held an adjunct position for a decade now. So quickly, just the expectation of roles. Why is it important? Because misalignment could contribute to a lot of conflict and communications. And our aim was to compare and contrast the expectations of the 2 stakeholder groups, the development team and the software users, about their involvement. And so some of these things, for example, I'm giving an example here. A user would have an expectation of low time commitment and no technical knowledge. In other words, they think that, okay, I don't need to have technical knowledge and my commitment is low. A development team member would have a high expectation of the users, both of time commitment and technical knowledge. And this causes a lot of conflicts. So to do this, we actually looked at the 2 groups and their expectations, and we discussed the alignment as being the high level, thinking about the high level question of how we can assess this alignment of the stakeholder expectation. So we evaluated this alignment by looking at 2 things. What activities should users be highly involved in? And the second one was, what user characteristics are important for effective user involvement? And so the 2 groups were in the language of Agile, I guess, Scrum Agile in this case, product owners and subject matter experts, and the development team were just the usual, in addition to the Scrum Master, testers and business analysts and all of that. So we conducted this exploratory case study about this matter by collecting qualitative data through interviews. And we wanted to design a method for the repertory grids approach by aggregating the results from the interviews with repertory grids. Varying degrees of expectation alignments were observed between these 2 groups. So although we use repertory grid instruments retrospectively in this study, we believe that it could also be applied from the start of the project or even proactively as a diagnostic tool throughout the project to assess and ensure that the expectations are aligned as you move forward. So the last part of my talk, and I've got about 10 minutes to go, I want to talk about the current work that I'm looking into, and that is about user involvement and citizen engagement in digital transformation project. So just to accept and concede that we don't have a universally accepted definition of digital transformation, neither in research literature nor in practice. And if you do a brief scan of the limited published work on digital transformation, we see that it's considered as a social phenomena or almost a cultural evolution. And for companies as a creation or evolution of business models supported by some digital solution. So we know that this phrase, digital transformation, has become quite pervasive in recent years. And most enterprises and public institutions, governments are heavily engaged and putting large sums of money in leveraging various combinations of digital technologies, such as the cloud, data analytics, IoT, AI, so on and so forth, to improve services that they deliver to their customers or streamline their internal operations. However, when we look at the stories of digital transformation failures, we see that there are also in abundance. Only 8% of companies that were surveyed by McKinsey in the recent report think that their business models will survive digitization. And the comprehensive 3-year research project that the McKinsey did with direct interaction with 2,000 plus organizations, they showed that one of the reasons for failure in DT is that companies don't appreciate the scale of disruption that is caused by digital transformation. So now I kind of revisit what I started my talk with about order and disorder and disruption. My current project that I'm currently working on is looking at involvement of users in digital transformation. So they are basically designed to support a variety of human activities and improve the environment and life of the users. In practice, what does this imply? It implies that digital technologies are used by humans and they have to be involved in the development process and participate in the decision making. But again, the questions are asked about how important is users' involvement in digital transformation, because here we're talking about massive number of users. We're not talking about small number of users or modest number of users. To what degree and to what stage of the development can we engage the users, and what are the most effective strategies for managing this engagement and also aligning the expectations, as I said in the previous case study. So my research objectives is mainly to empirically investigate the state of practice and focus on factors that contribute to positive and successful outcomes. I also want to explore the difficulties and challenges that humans encounter in the ideation, implementation, adoption, and use of these technologies. And also look at the entire life cycle and the adoption from technical, business, and human perspective. So the focus is on the roles, that is extent and degree of these roles that users, communities, and citizens engagement play if you want to facilitate successful outcomes and successful, joyful, happy user experience in adoption and usage of these technologies. So the recent work that I recently actually read a paper, very recently, last 2 weeks ago, about a paper by Tizard, Ritz, Liu, and Blinko, published 13th of May, A Voice of the Users, an extended study of software feedback engagement. They talk about the fact that software users provide online feedback about their use of the software applications these days. And this feedback can convey valuable requirements information. And this valuable information can contribute to the maintenance and evolution of the software. The 3 prominent online channels that they have used in their work is app stores, product forums, and social media. But they also argue not all software users can or want to provide online feedback. And they also talk about the diversity of approach and the fact that user base is, if the user base is not diverse enough, whether it is to do with age group or gender or whatever, background, socio-economical background, the elicitation of the needs of less vocal users who are perhaps absent online can create a potential risk. And this would be something that needs to be looked at. And their findings on what encourages and inhibits online user feedback can tell us how developers can increase engagement with their user base. So I find this work to be of particular interest to me. I want to say that in the end, in our research and practice of developing software technologies, we have to continue to pay more attention to humans and users and their involvement. We need to bring more balance in the triangle of humans, technology, and business. Because if you don't have this balance right, then you bound to get into all sorts of problems. Another thing that I wanted to share with you, a final word, is this that I recently found. I think I found it on Twitter. This is in March. You probably know that in March 2021, Jeff Wilk, who was the second most important person in Amazon company, quietly stepped away from Amazon. And you know that he had been instrumental in building the online book retailer to one of the most valuable and influential corporations in the world. So he talked about what he refers to as minimum lovable product, as opposed to minimum viable product that we keep on seeing in software development, where minimum viable product being a version of a product with just enough features to be usable by early customers who can then provide feedback for future product development. So he recognized that Amazon's MVP failed to insist on high standards, and teams were making trade-offs to prioritize speed over the delight of their customers. So they started using the minimum lovable product, which is a term that they use in Amazon to describe a version of a product with just enough features for early customers to love the experience. This is talking about happiness. And it may be that some customers are okay with minimum viable product, but customers don't want minimum viable products. It has to be lovable or they're not going to adopt it. So he says that they had to change the standard for how they were thinking about press releases and products and start sliding towards a standard that was too low. And I thought this really hit the nail for me. And I believe that software has to be able to make users happy. And that is basically my claim at the end. And I hope that I have been able to sell this message to all of you. And I'm happy to take questions after showing off my publications on this topic that I mentioned throughout the paper, mainly in collaboration with my former PhD student, Monir Banu, and also my colleagues in New Zealand, Jane Buchan and Steve McDonald. Thank you for listening, and I hope that I didn't go too fast and didn't cover too much.
Thank you very much, Didar, for inciting us and for the last probably 9 or 10 years, what's the work and development happening. I think the floor is open for questions. I think people can type a question in Q&A. I know some of the
and you have to read it out for me because
yeah, I'll definitely I'll be reading it. So Q&A is a place where you can type your questions.
Can I start waiting that the questions are typed? Thank you very much, Didar, for this very interesting and insightful presentation. I will read your book, Disorder and Disinformation Society. It looks very interesting. And I also like very much your double-edged sword metaphor for talking about the subjects which are under our interest. My question would be about the stakeholder satisfaction. In all those works, research works since 40 years, are there a kind of conceptual modeling of stakeholder satisfactions, the way it could be measured, because we could assume that according to the culture, education, or whatever, the satisfaction will not have the same characteristics, or even according to the business in which we will be. So are there any work about this modeling
satisfaction?
Yeah.
That's a very good question, Salmin. Thanks for asking it. And I think that from my recollection of the literature of 32 years that we looked at, satisfaction is considered a psychological state and based on perception of people about what they're doing. And also, to some extent, there is also a very, very large body of literature about acceptance of technology. And so people who accept the technology and continue to use it are considered those who have been satisfied with the technology. However, there's also been counterpoints to that, where I mentioned that from a management perspective and from a psychological perspective, we often seem to, when we are confronted with software that is frustrating and disruptive and simply doesn't work, we have three choices. We either have to come up with a workaround so that we can get our work done. We can reject it and just not use it, or we just put up with the problems. And I find that in many of the case studies, that both the ones that I have done and those that others have done, is that people tend to fluctuate between these depending on the how the management makes this happen. So if you're given no choice, in other words, like we were in my university, we were given a piece of software to do all our HR work, you know, anything to do with pay and with leave and everything. And there was no other choice. They said, that's it. This is the only thing that you have, and you got to put up with it. And people, you know, they were really frustrated, angry for quite some time. And eventually they just realized that I have no other choice. I have to put up with this. But there are also other examples that I had actually a PhD student in 2007, he graduated, and he looked at technology adoption. And he looked at how people who cannot use the technology for their own purpose, for, you know, that doesn't satisfy their requirement of doing a particular task, they find some other way of using the technology to do something else for them. So, you know, it's sort of shifting from my original requirement to some emerging requirements that come about as a result of use of this software. So in relation to measuring satisfaction, it's quite contextual, and it's really, I cannot say that there is a yardstick that you can put on and say that this is this much satisfaction, this is that much satisfaction. It's quite contextual and objective, in my opinion.
Didar, I have a question. Thank you, Celine. We have a question for you from the audience. John Krogesti asked a question: what are good ways of communicating the big picture to general stakeholders?
Yeah, that is a $1 million question. What is the good way of showing big picture? You know, what I find is that these are the kind of skills that you don't actually, you cannot teach people in universities. And I think that maybe those who study management to become managers and learn to communicate the big picture in a language and in a kind of small scale, they're the ones who win. For example, I remember that in the second case study, the one that I told you was a failed project, I found that even showing the big picture in terms of that particular business unit. So because there are different business units who may be using the same piece of software, but each of them have different needs and different views of that system. Now, if you are the sort of manager of all these business units and you know what the main aim and main work of that business unit is, you should be able to use the language of that business unit to tell them about the overall picture that this software is going to paint for them. But I find that this is probably one of the biggest challenges that software development managers, software project managers face in terms of their communication with the end user, of how to make it look exciting, how to make it, how to sell the product in such a way that would attract everyone to use it and attract everyone to engage and involve in it. So painting the big picture to me is probably one of the most challenging of all of these, because you know, especially, I mean, I look at, for example, in my current work in the digital transformation in government and citizen engagement, and how currently governments uses social media to try and engage users to give feedback about the products that they are, services or products that they are digitizing. And I find that some of them are really good in making short videos, because with videos you can, you know, show quite a lot, but sort of visual. And another one that I've seen that they do, they use information graphics. Some people refer to these as narrative visualizations, different kind of visualizations to show the big picture, using for citizen engagement, especially in government. So I think that we will see more of those coming along in terms of visualization of it in on screen for citizens.
Thanks, Didar. I think I have another question for you, Didar, from Bernard Talheim. If I pronounce the name right, apologies. Do you analyze the huge 25 years experience that has been intensively used, redeveloped, structured for systematic development of websites, like design and development of web information systems?
In relation to what specifically? I mean, I understand that there is a 25 years of literature on web development, but in relation to involving users, I didn't quite understand the question in relation to what I was talking about, or just in general?
In relation to user involvement.
We didn't go through web development because when we looked at the systematic review and used the keywords to search for them, we did come across a fair bit of work in the participatory design community and HCI community and many other communities who talk about the same topic, but from a different angle. And with the web development, unless you're talking about sort of interactive and interaction on the web, I think that is what I was talking about just now, that I can see happening in large-scale digital transformation in government, and bringing in the visualization and information graphics, which is part. I mean, I would suggest that information graphics is a kind of a web system.
Yeah, and I think what I've got further comments from, I think Bernard, about having a systematic experimenting with the users, or having a club of potential users to study users' involvement.
Oh, like I see. No, that's an interesting. Yeah, I mean, that would be a nice project for a PhD student, I think. Absolutely.
Thanks, Bernard. Thanks, Didar. I have another question for you, Didar.
Sure.
Since we still have time, I believe we can squeeze a couple, maybe. It's from Vakas. He's saying that in maintenance of the legacy systems, how can we make the new system changes minimum lovable product for the clients?
When you're dealing with legacy systems and you're
Yep.
migrating to a new system, is that what it is?
That's probably, I think, precisely around that. How you can make those new system
How
more
to
lovable.
make lovable, yeah. That's actually quite an interesting question. I put this last slide of Amazon's experience on minimum lovable product was because I find that in my current experience in my university at UTS that we are developing, digitizing a lot of our student experiences, and the team that I'm working with continuously talk about minimum viable product, paying very little attention about the way in which the product is going to be, that minimum viable part of the product is going to be used, and what kind of reactions is it going to be receiving from the users. Because what you're doing with minimum viable products, you just release something and you get the users use it and give you feedback so that you can go to the next stage. But if they're not engaged, if they're not interested, if they don't like what they see, they're unlikely to engage and they're unlikely to give you any feedback. And in fact, this has been confirmed by this study that I told you by New Zealand team. So I don't know. I think in terms of using, again, I'm a very I'm very enthusiastic about visualization techniques, and I really like some of the things that I see, especially in narrative visualizations and information graphics, of how you can engage people in looking at features and looking at products. So I suggest maybe use some visualization to attract people. I'm not suggesting that it can become lovable product immediately, but at least maybe semi-lovable product to begin with.
Or sometime maybe retire the legacy system altogether and people moving towards the new products like Salesforce and stuff, going away from legacy CRMs and stuff. So yeah, just throwing something in there.
Yes, I mean, Salesforce is an interesting product. I've actually been leading a project at Graduate Research School right now with Salesforce for looking at student inquiry system that we receive for PhD students that who want to come and do PhD with us, and looking at some of the things that Salesforce can do is quite good, except it doesn't really, unless they're not selling it to us, but it doesn't have that level of intelligence that you would like to see in systems who are supposed to be answering inquiries, you know. And I did ask them, do you have chatbots that we can use? And they said, we do, but you haven't paid for it, so we can't let you use chatbots. So everything comes at a cost.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I don't have further any question from the audience. I think we have a couple of minutes to kind of shift over. I would like to thank you very much for your time and being your first experience, as I said, in a Zoom, giving a keynote in a Zoom. So it looks like it's worked. So thanks a lot for your time. And thanks for the audience to be engaged with the questions. So we can just probably, I can see the hands probably maybe.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
And all the best for the rest of the conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Didar.
I think we have a...
See you.
Thank you, Didar. I think we have